As Bridget said, WISE has got a broad remit across STEM, but technology is our priority at the moment, computing and technology roles, hence the focus in this workshop. And it's particularly because when people talk about digital skills and tech, that in itself is quite broad. And what we hear from, we're a membership organisation with industry members and educational members, and what they hear all the time, particularly from the industry members, is the roles they struggle to fill in the first place, and particularly struggle to get female applications, are in these kind of examples up on the title of the workshop. In the deeply technical roles, these are just some examples of those: artificial intelligence, data science, machine learning, and that is true not just in computing firms, but in all the companies we work with. And so that's why it's important to us, and I was delighted when I was invited by the Institute of Coding to come and run this workshop. And so what I'm going to do is just run through some statistics which explain why I say technology is a priority, going through the numbers from women doing computer science at university and in the workforce, looking back at some 10-year trends, and then just where, and because of those stats, why I think it's important that we make it easier for women to move into these roles who maybe didn't do computer science at university, and some of the challenges around that as an idea, but some of the opportunities. And then when I've run through that, I'll invite my colleagues on the panel to come up and introduce themselves. We've got somebody from industry, somebody from education, and somebody who's herself changed, switched careers to move into software development. So all coming from a different perspective. We'll have a conversation up here on the panel, just I'll ask some questions to tease out the different perspectives. And then I want to, because it's a relatively small group, really interested in your thoughts and comments and experience, so I would like us to have a conversation about it, so there'll be some time for some interaction, and we've got some roving mics. So as I'm speaking and as you hear us having the conversation on the panel, be thinking about things you want to add to the conversation. Okay, so to start with the stats, looking at, this is we had a look earlier this year when the HESA data came out about just comparing by gender UK from first degrees at UK universities, the percentage of males and females doing STEM degrees, and this was the result. So this is quite stark, really, to show where the imbalance is. We're campaigning for gender balance in STEM, and at the moment, only of all the undergraduates, 9% of the females are doing a core STEM subject, and by core STEM, meaning the physical sciences, engineering and technology. So we're excluding medical science and biology in those, whereas probably, I don't know if there's anybody in life sciences here, but those subjects are more female dominated at the moment. So in the core STEM subjects, only 9% of women doing those degrees, but 33% of the males. So there's clearly an imbalance at university level. Obviously it starts earlier, but because of the audience of looking at the graduate figures. And then if you look if we look at the core STEM subjects, the core STEM degrees, as you'll see there are numbers of women doing those degrees is moving up, but quite slowly. So we've ended up with 26% this last year of those core STEM graduates in UK universities being female. So it's still a long way from gender balance. And then if we look at computer science, it's 16%, which has gone up slightly. So we're going in the right direction, but the progress is very slow. And if you look at the numerical increase, it's nowhere near enough for was it 1 million Jacqueline talked about yesterday, skills shortages in this area. The numbers just don't add up. If we look at the numbers coming out of doing computer science degrees at UK universities, certainly for females, not overall either. And then what we also looked at, which I think is interesting, is the postgraduates, and you can see the percentage of women doing second degrees is higher than at first degrees. So there could be, it's the first year we've looked at that as WISE and done that analysis, and So we might have a conversation later about what we think the reasons for that are, but there are more women doing a second degree in the core STEM subjects than doing a first degree. So that could be, you could see that as an opportunity then in terms of women with qualifications that may come into work in industry to fill up some of these skill shortage areas. But then moving on to the workforce, and this is measured from ONS data on STEM occupations. The total, we measure this every year, and the total is, in those core STEM subjects, the total percentage of women is 24%, but you can see there's quite clear differences between the S, the T, the E, and the M, if you like, with technology down at 16%. And then we've also this year looked at 10-year trends, and I'll show you that for IT. And the top line is the men, and the pink line is the women. And you can see that in 10 years, the percentage of women hasn't really grown very much. It's sort of flatlined, whereas the growth, you can see the growth and the line of men in professional IT roles, that is growing much faster than the line of women. So the gender gap is getting wider, which is one of the reasons why WISE is saying technology is a problem, because overall, in terms of numbers of core STEM occupations, more than a quarter of the total core STEM occupations are tech jobs. So, you know, if we don't do something about this, that gap's just going to get wider. And because of the educational data that I've shared, just relying on an educational pipeline of women choosing computing is not going to close that gap quick enough to meet the skills shortages which are acute now. And we'll hear more about that from Simon at Siemens as a representation of representative industry from Siemens' perspective. But there'll be many that's echoed across many other sectors. So therefore, what we want to do at WISE is say, yes, it's important to do more in schools and more effectively in schools to get more girls choosing computing, but there's a long-term, that's a long-term project, which we need to do for the future. But in order to fill the skills shortages today, we'll get a quicker return if we can make it easier for women who didn't do computer science as a degree, or even maybe didn't do a degree at all, but are interested in technology, make it easier for them to move into technology roles. And we've seen some examples from our members of some companies doing that, running their own training. And we've noticed there's a lot of boot camps around. Some of them charging quite a lot of money to students to do software development or cybersecurity, or I saw one advertising cybersecurity on the tube yesterday. So there's a market now for that kind of training, which isn't really regulated, but and so there's some challenges in terms of, you know, can we make those opportunities more accessible to women? And just from the conversations we've been having and what we've looked into this so far, summarise some of the challenges and then some of the opportunities. So starting with the challenges, first one I would say is access, because of the cost. One of these boot camps that I was talking to last month charges £15,000 for students to do a 3-month full-time course in London for getting an entry-level software development job, and then charges the employers to take them on at the end of it. And they're not the only one. There are lots of these around. Some are offering free training, some are charged for that. That particular one's full-time, which again is an issue for people who can't afford to give up their job and can't afford that, you know, or may have other commitments. That means they can't do a full-time course, and they may not have the money to pay for it. So if we could remove some of those access barriers, there could be more opportunities to get more women into these roles. The second thing is about support. So if you're again, it's from the experience of talking to women about these issues and some of the providers, that if you in a minority of any sort, you may begin to doubt whether this is right for you. And if we're looking at women with different ages, from different backgrounds, some might have degrees, some might not have degrees, some might have work experience, some might not, providing a support that's appropriate for women in all sorts of different circumstances becomes a bit of a challenge. So interested to explore that with you and with the panel. And the flexibility both in the training provision how it's delivered, the hours, the commitments that's necessary for doing the training, and then flexibility in the jobs at the end of it is an issue. And I just quote that figure there from the University of Bristol research they did for the Government Equalities Office, which isn't probably a surprise, but a lot of women after going on a career break are looking for part-time roles, and there aren't enough part-time opportunities in the IT sector, and so we don't want to be training women who then can't find a role at the end of that training. So there's some issues there, which is the next challenge on the list. Brings me on to that experience. If somebody's not worked in tech before, many job briefs that we've seen require specifying length of experience, knowledge of different languages, programming languages, etc. And if women are switching careers, clearly they need time to gain that experience in order to get a job at the end of it. So that's a challenge, creating more opportunities for women to gain that experience, which we might explore in the panel. And then moving on to the culture of, both in the learning environment and in the workplace, making sure that the women, when they get into the jobs, are in an atmosphere where they'll feel they can be themselves and thrive and do their best work. And that's part of what WISE does, is work with our members on a framework called the 10 Steps. We've put some cards around about that, which is about transforming the culture to be inclusive, so that women stay when they're in a STEM environment and they move up into leadership roles, which then in turn makes it, there are more visible role models, makes it easier to recruit more women in. So that's an important part of the solution as well, not just about the training, it's about addressing the culture so that women stay. And then finally, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's about the level of the training, because a lot of these boot camps, etc., are about entry-level courses, and I'm hearing from our industry members that where they find it harder to, the roles they find it harder to recruit to are at people with 2-3 years experience, maybe mid-career or more senior level experience. And so is the training, it's a question, or it's something we want to have the conversation about, is the training that's available it needs to be at different levels. Is there a gap there for training that's to fill those roles at mid to senior level? So it's another challenge in terms of addressing, creating training pathways that are fit for purpose. So it's not straightforward. There are some challenges there, but there's a lot of opportunity. Have I missed one? I've gone. Here's the opposite. Yes, some examples again from our corporate members. The top 3 are from companies running returner programs specific to technology, and the benefits that they have told us they get from those running returner programs, giving people, some cases they're not just for women, they're open to women and men who've had a career break, but it brings in those benefits listed there, a new talent pool of people with experience and very committed and energetic, brings new ideas into the teams, and it's proved cost neutral or actually benefited the company. And then the final one, but they're all relatively small scale, you see. They're kind of, they're good and they're making a difference to those companies, but they're in the 10s, 20s at most. So it's not enough, it's not at scale. And what WISE is interested in is working with the Institute of Coding and our industry partners is, can we scale up these programs, take the best of them, take the learning, make these much more widely available so that more women can take up these opportunities. And the case study that I've put at the end there from the BBC, I just think that is, the numbers there really stand out. So this is based on a scheme that originally was at Sky, and we'll hear from Izzy in a minute who went on the course at Sky. The BBC took the learning from Sky, did their own scheme, introduced it as a pilot in the design and engineering part of the BBC, which is software developers and broadcast engineers, and they had 11 of the women on the pilot scheme now work for the BBC as software engineers, and so they rolled it out again in November, and the second time, having had the successful pilot that did a bigger marketing push around it and had 8,000 completed applications from women. It was a women-only course who wanted to be to have this training for 16 places. So it begs the question, there's 7,800 and whatever women who want to, at least, who are interested in moving into software development, who didn't get on the BBC scheme. It's just an indicator that there is an appetite out there amongst women. And some people say to me, well, it's the brand of the BBC, people want to work. I'm sure there's something in that, but nevertheless, there's a significant number of women who are interested in moving into a more technical role. I think there's a big opportunity there for us to work together to create pathways for them so that they can take up some of the jobs that they want to do and the industry wants them to do, and then everybody benefits from that. So that's why this is important to me and to WISE. And now I'd like to invite my colleagues from the
So basically, at the Open University, we developed a course, this is a number of years ago, online course, which students can do at home. It has a particular amount of time they can work on it, so basically 8 sessions of 3 hours. It includes videos, activities, etc. But it was teamed up with Equate Scotland, and so they basically took that and used that in the context of webinars and also, for instance, career clinics.
Yes.
And that combination seemed to be quite effective. So about 60% of the people who joined that then eventually also went on to either permanent jobs, traineeships, or further training. Yes. The other thing, just very quickly, in terms of sort of findings at the Open University with undergraduate students, so there was another scholarship project which looked at gender, female versus male students.
Yeah.
And
this is for your computer science
for computer science courses,
yeah.
So computing and IT.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we found is that with regards to female students, there was a bigger proportion of students who took computing and IT with a second subject, so it could be mathematics, statistics, or psychology. From the focus group discussions, it turned out that doesn't necessarily mean that maybe they had broader interest or didn't yet know exactly what they want to study, but rather sometimes it was very focused in the sense that somebody would say, I want to do data analytics or I want to do AI, and I know I need a lot of mathematics for that, so rather than take the regular computing, I do Maths Plus. Other things, so male students, we found a bigger proportion of them actually was already in an IT career versus the female students. On the other hand, if you then looked at prior STEM studies, it was the other way around. So the female students, there was a bigger proportion of them who had already done STEM studies before.
But not computing.
Not computing, and yes, exactly. So they were really trying to move into the computing area.
Yes.
There were also some queries about sort of feeling of confidence and challenges. And there, the female students did express more of a sort of weariness in terms of taking these studies on. If you actually look at the attainment in our modules, it's actually female students do slightly better than the male students. So,
but they were
but they were, when they started or when they were asked, they were less sure, and they saw it as a bigger challenge than the male students.
Yes, which is why I put support, sort of reinforces the point about the need for support, doesn't it? Yeah, to give that encouragement. Yeah, and so that's really interesting. I think the difference that the women are moving in from another subject to study computing as a first degree. So it kind of reinforces that point. It's another example to show there is an appetite amongst a lot of women to retrain, doesn't it? Don't you think?
Definitely, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll come back to that. Thank you. Do you want to introduce yourself and share your experience?
Sure. My name's Isabel Draper Edwards. I'm an associate software developer at Sky. I think two things I don't think I've ever led with in an intro before, but it feels quite pertinent to today's discussions, are that I'm not a graduate and I'm soon turning 40, so double whammy. I am just a regular mum of 2. My daughter is just turned 11, my son is 6, and my husband works a lot. You know, life is tricky. We kind of decided early on that I would do most of the childcare, and that was fine, but it definitely impacted career choices over the years. My career, really, the majority of it I've spent with NatWest Bank. So for about 15 years, I worked in a variety of business and commercial banking roles before being offered voluntary redundancy in December 2016. At the time, I took it because I knew I wanted a change, albeit I didn't know at the time quite what I wanted the change to be. But I decided maybe take some time out, spend some time at home, and I realised that's not really me. It wasn't very good for my mental health. But my son hadn't started school yet, so I kind of needed to find a solution. I wanted to spend some time with him before he did. So I decided to set up my own business, which was great. I was very lucky, it was very successful, but I still didn't really feel that fulfilled. I think I definitely missed the hustle and bustle of an office, going from that to working from home. But I also just didn't feel fulfilled. I felt like I wanted a challenge, like I really wanted to learn something. And so with that in mind, then I started researching learning opportunities online. And I think I felt really disheartened, if I'm honest, at the beginning, at the amount of things that were out of my reach, because I wasn't a grad or because I had childcare commitments and I did have to work full time in the meantime, and for various different reasons. So yeah, I did feel really sad. And then I went out for dinner with the girls, which always helps. And one of them mentioned this Guy's Get Into Tech course. And I kind of instantly started to feel really drawn to something that I could apply a creative and an analytical mindset to. And also the idea of, like I said, I've got an 11-year-old daughter, and to be able to inspire her to break through barriers, to be able to communicate with her on a digital level as she progresses through her teens, as well as being able to do something that I think my maths teacher I would never, ever be able to do. She really wasn't my biggest fan. And so all these kind of things made me very excited about the whole thing. So I went home, researched it, and I went on to go to the Insight Day, and I applied, and I was successful. And like you say, there's often with these things a huge amount of applicants. There's over 1,000 applicants for an afternoon of 65 women, which then had to carry out this macro task and do some various other things. So that brought the shortlist down to 35, I think it was. And then at the end, there was 15 places, on the course. So it was a real, your heart was kind of in your mouth as to the likelihood of you getting on. It was very slim. And obviously, I felt like it was even slimmer for me because I was amongst lots of super wonderfully intelligent graduates as well. So yeah, I was very, very fortunate to get on it. At the end of the course, there's the opportunity, it's not compulsory at all, but the opportunity to apply for a role in Sky's Engineering Academy. So, in for a penny, in for a pound. I did that, and you go through a bit of an assessment process. You have to do a non-attended assessment online, and then go to the actual assessment day. Where I must stress, the emphasis, because the course itself is 15 weeks long, so you're not going to come out of it superstar coder at that point. But the actual assessment day, they do want you to apply, obviously, different techniques that you've learned over that period of time. But there's a huge emphasis on the soft skills and how you approach situations and so on and so forth. And sometimes I think that's kind of missed when it comes to these things. Companies are looking for coders, we just need people to code. I am proof that anyone can code, genuinely. So I thought it was, rocket science. It's difficult, but it's not rocket science. Anyone can do it, but the soft skills, they're a treat. That's what you're kind of looking for when it comes to recruitment. So, but yeah, anyway, so I was very lucky, and here I am.
Thank you.
Living my dream.
And I think that's given a nice lead in, Simon, because some of the things you were talking about from an industry point of view.
It has. I've had my thunder well and truly stolen. So I'm Simon Rennie. I'm head of digital for the Siemens mobility rolling stock division. So our core business, we have around sort of 3,000 vehicles out on the sort of British network, so that's around sort of 25% of the UK trains that we have built and maintain. And my relatively small team's job is to take data from trains of various ages and construct really cool analytics and visualizations which help us maintain the train in a really intelligent way and get the depot operations working. So it's taken quite an analog world and bringing it kicking and screaming into the 21st century. So the kind of things that we need, so from a technical point of view, do we need technical skills? So people who can develop, do DevOps, do user experience, implement things well, go through a testing cycle. Yes, we do. But in our world in particular, so much of what good looks like is around successful business transformation, how you change the culture. So quite frankly, to pick up on Izzy's point, if you don't get people, if you don't engage properly, if you don't get customers, if you don't get culture, it won't ultimately be as effective as it could be. So and a big part of what we look for isn't purely can you do the coding, can you get on with people, and can you influence them to a positive outcome, and that's really important for us.
Okay, thank you very much. And I've got some, we've talked about, we've had examples here from the Sky course that you went on, Isabel, was women only.
Yes.
One of the courses, you mentioned the one with Equate in Scotland was women only, and then obviously your computer science degrees aren't, and many of the programmes that the IoC has funded so far aren't. So I'm just interested in thoughts about what you think the pros and the cons are of courses in computing that are specific to women. Maybe start with you, if that's all right. Would you have gone on a course if it was mixed gender? Was there something about the women only aspect of it that appealed?
To be fair, I probably would have, because I've been in banking for years and been around all the men, and they don't bother me anymore. But I know there's plenty of people that did the course that actually did it entirely because it was a female course. Some actually for cultural reasons as well. So there's lots of sort of reasons why people prefer it. I think overall it's less intimidating, I guess. You're trying to break into an industry where the workforce is predominantly male, and then you go to a course and everybody there is predominantly male. And so, there'd be questions over, do I belong here? Am I welcome here? Would I have to work twice as hard to, prove my place here? So I think all of that, you don't have to think about that. You don't have to worry about that. You can really just focus on the learning. So
yeah. Any comments from yourself, Paul, about that?
From the scholarship study again, the colleagues did ask about this for undergraduate students, and generally you have to bear in mind it is mainly online learning or distance learning. So there are some face-to-face elements, but it's a small part. Those students didn't say they were bothered about it in particular. They actually did, so in the report that was subsequently written up, they did mention that age was actually something they were more concerned about. So the age of the other participants taking part. With regards to the Equate Scotland experience, that was an interesting mix because the badged course, the online element, was open to anybody basically, and was also written in a way that I think didn't necessarily say it had to be female participants. But then the personalization, which was one of the highest rated elements of the whole package, so the clinics and the webinars, that was specifically for women via Equate Scotland. So it was this kind of mixture of something which, for instance, building this badge course is quite a big investment in terms. So narrowing that to maybe one group is economically less viable. Whereas then actually when you deliver it to the actual constituency, having this personalization to particular groups seem to work very well. So that might be an interesting.
So it might be providing support to a mixed group. That same kind of support could be delivered. So it's not one or the other, really. It could be a combination of solutions for different people. And you mentioned about obviously the OU is online courses, so that brings me on to my next question really, because to do e-learning, distance learning, online learning, makes it more accessible in terms of the location and the hours. People can study, fit it around other commitments, and it removes that psychological barrier that you described, Isabel, walking into a class where you might be in a minority. So that might be more positive for women moving into computing. But if you're working remotely, if you're studying remotely, I'm just interested in how you provide the support to somebody to keep going if they're having these moments of, feelings of self, a bit wondering about it. Is it for me? That kind of thing. And is online learning? Is there a need for some face-to-face, do you think, to give that support? Is blended learning really the answer in the end?
Yeah, I would definitely, in terms of the OU, blended learning is very much the approach we take. So in our big undergraduate modules, for instance, we have, at the beginning and the end, there are big face-to-face events where students actually meet each other and their tutors. And so we try to, we decided in these particular modules now to make those quite whole day events, because it can be quite a time investment as well to travel up to something. You could do lots of small ones, but then that fragments the time and makes it less likely actually that students attend.
Right. So coming to a large-scale event, more cost-effective and more valuable to the students,
The Sky model worked on a basis that you went to a class once a week, so every Thursday evening, and you covered a topic, and then you went away and in an agile way worked with a pair over the weekend as such to deliver a piece of homework or a task based on what you'd covered on that Thursday, and then you presented it on a Skype call to your tutor on a Tuesday, and then on Wednesday you did the pre-reading for Thursday, and so on and so forth.
So you did some of it from home and some of it coming in the Sky.
And actually I think if I had done that all at home on my own, those moments where I did, and there were moments early on where I just thought, oh my goodness, what am I doing? Like there's no way I can do it. I may have quit. I may have quit early on. There was an element of saving face. I didn't want to not turn up tomorrow, if I'm perfectly honest. So there was an element of that. I definitely think having the support. I mean, it's very supportive, as much as it can be intimidating to start with. If you don't, let those feelings take over of, I'm not a graduate, or I'm too old, or I'm female, or whatever the insecurity is, if you can kind of move on from that, then you've conquered that bit of it, which sometimes is your biggest hurdle, much bigger than learning to code. It's like, our own mental insecurity. So I think once you've moved past that, and then you kind of get to the point where you realise actually these people don't care whether you're 40 or female or what, it's only you that cares. So you get to this point where you then start to learn to code and you start to enjoy it, and people are supportive, and then you get sort of further on down the line where, the superstar 22-year-old doctor is asking your help on something, and that's very uplifting, again, from a very selfish point of view. But, so there's lots to be gained from being with people, but there is also lots to be gained from flexibility and being able to make your mistakes in your own kind of bubble at home, and, try and figure stuff out without feeling like somebody sat beside you watching, all the time. So I think blended learning is exactly what's required.
Have you got anything to add to that, Simon?
I think our experience is one where the pure learning of the content in the technology domain lends itself quite well to being taught remotely. The things where we get feedback from our learners where being in a physical place adds a ton of value is having a peer group and a network where you feel like you are part of something and there's an ownership of the culture. And then secondly, ultimately you're serving as a support function, a business, and understanding how that business works, and having experience of its operation on the ground. In combination, it's those two factors that have mattered quite significantly to us, and it's worth that investment of physical contact.
Bringing people together physically.
While at the same time, removing the barrier of entry that says, look, you have to do something full time for 6 months, because that's unlikely to be viable for all audiences.
Yes. Okay. Then the next thing I mentioned about the cost, and there's these various boot camps around, certainly in big cities now, charging fees to students and charging fees to employers. Any of you got any experience of those yourself as an employer or as individual friends who've gone down that route? Any comments on that?
Or quite a short answer, Helen. No, we don't. But
No.
I think we participate in some industry events which will sort of focus on short and sharp hackathons, and can we spot talent by doing that. But beyond that, we'll tend to put effort into longer term programs, in particular apprenticeships, that we think engender a bit more loyalty and help.
Yes.
Just bring people into the organisation in what we think
Yeah.
is a sustainable way.
Yeah. Okay. Right. And, well, you mentioned about apprenticeships there, and I wonder then if there's an opportunity to make more of in terms of funding the cost of the training, to use the levy contributions that larger employers are making to fund through the apprenticeship levy to fund training for women who want to move into tech.
Yeah, this could be quite a long answer, because I'm a bit of an evangelist for apprenticeships. So I guess if there's any preconception of apprentices being 16-year-olds knocking bits of wood around, I think from a technology point of view, put that out of your mind. The apprenticeship levy and the corresponding standards, when they were launched a few years ago, didn't necessarily have a particularly good press, but I would advocate those schemes very strongly today. So firstly, in the line of work that we operate in, you can bring people in between level 4 and level 7, so that's everything from an HND equivalent through to a master's. The way in which they can be delivered is hugely flexible. The value proposition for somebody who might think about higher education but rule it out, you're being paid, you have that flexibility. There's a job at the end of it. There's an employer support network around you. You have to fill a requirement of 20% training, off the job. So, the ratio of the amount of time you have to invest in one time, does give you that flexibility. If you are the employer, your levy funding, if you're a large organisation, is paying for the training. If you're a small employer, the skills funding agency is funding things. And when you invest the time and effort in that, you are creating and building talent, which is very much aligned to your own organisation. So you won't successfully finish your apprenticeship unless you go for an employer gateway that says, look, this person is really well qualified to do a particular job in my organisation really well, in the right way. And by the way, if you're at degree level, you'll get that degree as well. So it spans, and it takes away that binary choice between, look, do I want to go into work, or do education? And when I look at the kind of skill shortages that we experience, generally speaking, we are okay at first graduate level. So if we want data scientists who are fresh out of university or they've just done their doctorates, we can usually find that. Where things get a little more challenging is 2 or 3 steps up the rung. There might be quite an active contractor market, but is there a surfeit of talent to fill that? And generally speaking, we find that comparatively difficult. Hence investing in people who will do those jobs is good news. And I think the other lovely thing about apprenticeships is this isn't about people who are new into the organisation. If you work within a business, those schemes are open to you, as long as you're fundamentally acquiring new skills.
So when you say that, do you mean you've taken some people who've been at Siemens already have moved on to an apprenticeship programme in order to sort of move into those technical roles.
Exactly. So, I mean, we've got a comparatively small team, and our ambition is, we need to grow the size of that team, by 50% in 2 to 3 years. And actually, we want to grow that talent through apprenticeship schemes. The way, if we've got it right, the way we've geared the offer, it is flexible. It can appeal very widely. And you might be fresh out of school, you might be returning to work, you might be an existing employee. But what we're trying to do, is for as broad an audience as possible, and they remove the barriers that actually prevent people from being able to take up those options.
Okay.
Because
so
of
what's
whatever
the age profile of those on your degree apprenticeships at the moment? Do you know?
So I mean, at the moment, we've got a grand total of everything between 18 and I think 46. So they're not huge numbers, but there's a pretty broad spread.
Interesting, isn't it? So do you think there is an opportunity then, as a route, is that what you're saying, for women who are interested in changing career to maybe look at degree apprenticeships as an option?
We sincerely hope so, and I guess ask me this in a year, because I think this is the first time where we've tried to shape the routes in a way which do offer that flexibility. So we hope we will get pretty close to gender equality with this year's intake. We've learned a few things along the way. I mean, interestingly, whenever we mention mobility or transport or trains, our level of female applicants disappears to zero. However, when we actually talk about what we think the job is really about, which is it's business change and it's engagement and it's team and it's making a difference and it's driving culture in a different way. When we emphasise those points, and as if by magic, we'll get up to the 30-40% level.
That's very interesting, isn't it? It's a power of language, really, and how you present the opportunity. Yeah, makes a difference in terms of
we get rid of the train spotting connotation. And, it tends to work better.
And I had another question about age, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but I'm just interested in if you think there is a sort of optimum age bracket. Is there a point where it's not realistic for women to think about switching career? Because it's too late, I don't know.
Not directly from the industry point of view, but I had a look at the Open University and sort of the profile of attainment of the students, and it's sort of a complicated story, because if you look at all the students at the OU, so over 100,000, and you look at their attainment, actually the older you get, the better you do.
Really?
The more the completion rate goes up. With STEM, it's slightly different, actually. It is a bit more of a bell shape. Yeah. And it seems like the optimum age, if you go on those data, is between 40 and 49. Those are the students who perform best.
Really?
And the ones at the extreme, so because we've got students all the way from 18 to over 60, basically. At those levels, they are performing at the same level in terms of completion. So it's an interesting picture.
Yes, it is an interesting picture. Yeah. Any other comments on,
I think sometimes just the older you are, the more you know yourself and you know what you want to do, and the less whimsical your decisions become, I guess, over the years. So I think, like when I was younger, I didn't not do a degree for any particular reason. I was okay at school, but I got a job in the summer and I really enjoyed it. And I got promoted and I really enjoyed that. And so I, not for any particular reason, just carried on doing what I was doing. But I kind of feel like then throughout the years I've, that's kind of been held against me, for want of a better phrase. And so, I definitely think there's a level of maturity that comes with approaching your 40s. And we just know what we want, a little bit more, and just maybe a little bit more committed to our decisions. And that's not across the board, but that does come with age. And we've got a lot riding on it: the mortgage, the kids. So we've got to make it work. So I'm not surprised that you have good success around that age bracket.
Yeah. And Simon, from an industry point of view, have you got any comments on the kind of age?
I guess this comes back to the fundamental point of why diverse teams are good, because you have a broad talent pool, with a range of perspectives and life experiences, and you would be foolish to ignore any one part of it.
Yes, because we all bring something different, and the age is part of that dimension of diversity. Yeah, absolutely. Good. Okay. And now the other question is looking about levels, which I touched on in the challenges, and found that quite a lot of companies, it's a bit what you were saying, Simon, earlier about the 2 or 3 points up, in terms of experience and level, is where you find it harder to find people to fill roles. And so if thinking back to the topic, which is about getting more women into these technical roles, does everybody need to start at entry level? Or are there opportunities to move in if you've got some business experience, but maybe not the technical knowledge or experience? Does everybody have to start at the bottom and work their way up?
In theory, if I come back to the apprenticeship point, there are academic prerequisites to some schemes, but equally most apprenticeship schemes are designed to be able to work on a standalone basis, so you can enter.
Yes.
In theory, there is no reason, and if you've got the aptitude, why you couldn't go straight into a level 6 degree apprenticeship scheme, to be a solution scientist. You might find it hard. There's no reason why you couldn't do that if you wanted to, and the fundamental aptitude and motivation was there.
So that the apprenticeships offers that flexibility because of the different levels.
Yeah. So effectively, a number of the good things is now they're starting to emerge as an ecosystem of career progression. The nasty tagline is, look, you can stop and earn, and then you can resume after however many years your future progression in terms of your qualification, and then how senior in the organisation you
can come back to it, so you don't have to do it in a continuous process.
So generally, there's a minimum amount that you have to spend, doing an apprenticeship typically. But if you want to spend longer, you can. Equally, there's no obligation where you have to be on a hamster wheel.
No, it's similar to OU, isn't it? The modules, if I've understood it right. You can do some, have a break, do some more.
That's right. Yes, and there is actually an interesting development, or something that's already built into the degree apprenticeships, in that. In principle, when these are offered, we should also be able to acknowledge or recognize prior experiential learning. So this actually does mean that you can, even academic modules, we at the OU, we're at the moment doing a pilot on this, where you could, if you say, okay, I've already got this experience, not via academic study, you can put together a portfolio. There might be other components that you have to submit, and then we look at the learning outcomes or the key behaviors that are associated with that module, and there is an assessment about whether you can basically skip that. So it's almost like credit transfer, but not credit transfer in the traditional sense where you're taking credit from one university to another, but it's more real life experience which you can then get credit against, basically.
Okay, so there is some moves to
yes,
in that direction. It might be something we take. There might be the other examples from people in the audience here. So I just had a couple of final points on my list here. One's about looking at the hiring end, and you mentioned about you gave an example, Simon, about using different language to attract more women into the roles within your bit of Siemens Mobility. And is there any other examples from either your own or other organisations who've managed to open up jobs for women in technology by making changes to the recruitment process in any way, whether it be by language or other elements of the process?
I think the classic, trap that certainly large organisations, and especially large, grey-looking German organisations can fall into, is be over rigid, on the prerequisites, and the extent of experience which is required for any one role. And if I'm going to caricature crassly, what we'll tend to find is women will be much more diligent in their self-assessment, and if a number of requirements that they feel they don't meet, then that tends to dissuade applicants. Whereas the feckless males will sort of apply irrespective of the extent to which those criteria may be met.
Yeah.
And I think that's been one of the drivers where we've talked about what the role is like. What does it feel like to be there? What's important to us? And the prerequisites then become secondary to the search and the kind of person you're actually looking for.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think how you because what we were finding at one point was we were getting really good gender balance up to the point where we started assessment processes, and then the assessment process would go in with very sort of binary checks and balances, and we were accidentally filtering out a ton of talent at the first point of engagement with our business.
Okay.
Which is done.
Yeah. Okay. So you have to look at what happens at each stage of the process. Yeah. And what about the issue of the flexibility in the jobs themselves? So do you think there are enough jobs available on a flexible basis in computing to make them accessible to women who have other commitments?
At the moment, I don't think there are, but equally, I do think the sector, in particular, where you're dealing with lots of variable demand, and that's certainly true, in developer world. When you've got lots of variable demand, having flexible pockets of your team who can sort of fit into that. I mean, it almost renders you have to do something full time, and what particular time, it renders it relevant to having a successful outcome. So yeah, I think the nature of demand in our kind of business, relative to people who want to work flexibly is a pretty good match.
Right, good. So that's encouraging as well then, isn't it? Yeah. And on the Sky, do you work full time now?
I do work full time, but it was something that was definitely, on my mind. And like I say, the children are at school and they're at breakfast club and after school club, love them. But they still, that still doesn't encompass the whole working day. So it was something I was really conscious of, and I didn't want to start something that then I couldn't finish, or that I'd really enjoy but have to give up, or waste a space, or all the different reasons. So I did speak with Conrad Langworthy, the head of the Sky Engineering Academy, at the very outset before I applied, just to make sure that it was something that they were comfortable with and that they supported, because otherwise it just wouldn't work for them, it wouldn't work for me. So yeah, but they're hugely open-minded when it comes to flexibility. And I think it's not even a parent thing. There's a lady who did my course who lives in Birmingham, and she really wanted to work for Sky, so she just works from home for 2 days a week. She doesn't have children, she just wants to spend some time with her husband. It's not all about having children, it's just about your work-life balance, whatever that encompasses. So yeah, definitely at Sky they've been very, very flexible. They're pretty easygoing, really.
Right, so then they've got a good person to work for them as a result of that.
Yeah, quite. And going back to the point you guys were talking about before, the whole process of the Get Into Tech process for Sky, it's very clever on their part, really. Instead of, somebody filling out a personal statement with an online helper and turning up and trying to convince you for an hour, that they're the girl for the job, they've actually got to know you over a huge period of time by designing this in-house experience. And so before I even apply for the job, they've seen me on good days, they've seen me when I'm challenged, they've seen me on bad days, they've seen me tired, for
like a really extended interview almost.
Exactly like that. It's very much like the Apprentice style kind of thing, where every now and then you're thrown a little curveball, and if you deal with it, then you're fine, you can stay. So there's huge benefit I see to the employer from that kind of experience.
But it works both ways, because you get to know Sky as well, don't you?
Massively, yeah, hugely. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a good opportunity for both sides to get to feel if the fit's right. So
Yeah.
that's good. Yeah, we need more opportunities like that. I think the apprenticeship might be one route. Yeah.
Well, I guess culturally, and I think the IT sector is well used to, for example, drawing the services of a software house in a different country. So working hours are fundamentally happening at a different time of day to maybe your core working hours. So look, if you're used to that already, look, it's not a huge step at all. To say, right, no, that, you know what, your UK workforce can also work flexibly.
Yeah, and then it opens up opportunities for more talent to come into the industry, which is what we all want. Okay. And the final thing was just asking I think we have touched on this, but to see if any of you want to add, what other areas of experience and skills are needed to do jobs in technology well. I think we have touched on that. Any further comments on that area?
Yeah, I think that the sort of communication and interpersonal skills are really important. And it is interesting because we, at the OU, our undergraduate students range from like people who are already in IT to people who are really new to it. And large populations, over 1,000 students, there's always a student who says, why am I made to do why do I have to talk to other students, kind of thing. and the good thing is there's always somebody pipping up who says, well, I'm actually working in industry. And this is exactly how it is in the real world. So we as lecturers don't even have to, it's even more believable if another student who's actually got a real world experience.
Most of the work's done in teams, right?
I'm
guessing.
Yeah.
Either it's Sky or Siemens or,
Yeah, I was saying to you earlier, there was times early on where I felt very inadequate because I didn't have a degree or I wasn't, 25 or all these sorts of things. And then as time has gone on, I realised that actually when the grads that have done the course then move to Sky, then there's different challenges for them, which are, like my day one bootcamp challenges, which I didn't think of. It was just new people and new teams and new things to integrate into, and that I hadn't realised had become sort of second nature over the course of my 15 years in the bank. But for these guys, then that was a different challenge, and so there's a challenge for everybody. It just looks slightly differently depending on who you are and what your background is.
But you've got something to contribute as well as different people having different challenges.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which is great. Back to your point, Simon, about diversity and diversity.
I mean, last person we recruited into our team is somebody who's going to run our global support function. Now we've got software set up, and this is a woman with no background in pure technology at all. However, has an extraordinarily strong service ethic. Gets business change. Gets engaging. With people. Gets communication. Does it astoundingly well. And we had to spend 2 or 3 months having a conversation. Says, look, those are the attributes we want from you. The rest of the things, you are surrounded by people with the right degrees and competencies. We will give you that technical knowledge, but what we find more difficult, to train because you have it intuitively, that's what I really want from you.
Well, that's really good example then, and should be encouraging to. In terms of it's an example of the opportunity, isn't it, to get more women into the industry. Okay, so you've heard from all of us now. It's over to you. Very interested to hear your own experiences, either from teaching the subject or in industry or as learners. So we've got roving mics. People, if you want to raise your hands, if you've got a question or a comment to add to the conversation, and if you start by just introducing yourself, that'd be helpful. Anybody? Yeah.
Thank you very much for a very interesting debate. You're not the first panel over the course of this conference that have spoken about the need to change the narrative if we're going to encourage more women into the tech business. And I wondered if you've got any particular ideas about how we go about that and the modes of communication that we use for that. And in particular, Isabel, whether you are busy recruiting lots of female friends of your own and telling them that it's different from what you thought it might be, and I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's like a huge, cloud of suspicion. Nobody really knows what's involved in it, other than it's incredibly technical and incredibly difficult to understand. And like I said, it's not super easy, but it's also not the hardest thing, to grasp. And again, it goes back to a point somebody raised. Actually, I think it was in one of the discussions earlier on today, where sometimes as women, we don't so much want to know what the technologies are, but we want to know what we can do with them. And so that having that kind of discussions, and when I talk to my 11-year-old daughter and I'm trying to explain software engineering to her, throwing out Java and Jenkins and whatever, it means absolutely nothing to her. But explaining to her the kind of ways that technology can change our world, that's what's kind of lighting up her eyes. And so I think in terms of changing the narrative, again, get rid of the trains and the buses. No one really needs to know that, No one really needs to know whether it's going to be Java or Scala. They need to know what you're going to do with it and how empowering that can be.
Yeah, I would absolutely support that from the evidence of whys over the years, really, that sense of purpose and putting something back, and the why of a job, really, not the what so much, but the why you're doing it, so that we can say, well, you feel proud because you've contributed to something bigger. And, whether it be, so in technology, there are plenty of examples for that in whatever sector. And I think that then is inspiring and motivating, not just to girls and women, to everybody, but particularly for girls and women. It's a different way to think about it. And traditionally, exactly as Simon says, the jobs and the roles have been focused on the what and the very technical nature of it, which may not be the most inspirational thing to talk about.
Firstly, I wanted to say thank you very much to the gentleman from Siemens, because it sounds a great credit to Siemens for what you've actually been doing there. I've got first of all a very quick observation. I'm thinking about my local FE colleges, and there's been a huge reduction in the amount of evening classes, technical classes, and so forth, and that must be a great inhibitor when there aren't the local classroom-based classes for people who might be thinking about experimenting with IT, practicing IT, learning new skills. Because when they look in there's a segment of population that I think is still like to go to their local FE, and they look and they can't find anything. And although I might find all of these things online, you've got to know what you're looking for before you go onto YouTube, before you go onto Udemy or FutureLearn or whatever it is, to be able to take the confidence. And so I think that's one of the issues. I think the FE sector, the local colleges for adult education has just suffered so much, and I'm sure that's one of the reasons that things have got, I think, a little bit worse over the last few years. My second point is that I still think, looking at the numbers of what you were describing, there's still relatively very few opportunities, very few posts that are available for tech apprenticeships in IT as a comparator. And I'm wondering what is stopping companies from opening up that opportunity more.
And they could be linked, because some of the training provision for the digital apprenticeships may come from the FE sector. Simon, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Let me take both of those points in turn. So from our point of view, the FE sector is hugely important. So in terms of having a partnership with an FE college in the right geography, we've gone from having 3 college relationships to 15 over the course of the last 3 years. So wherever we've got an operational site, that we've made sure that there's an FE partner within range, and that's to do 2 things. And so to deliver the core academic elements of our non-degree apprenticeships, but also in any prior learning that may be required, to get the right functional, non-functional skills to be able to qualify, so that we don't accidentally exclude people who might be really good, but they've had a hard start in life, and therefore we try and give them the opportunity to step onto that. In terms of opportunities, going forward, a lot of the reasons that these haven't yet opened up is the whole world of levy and standards is comparatively new. So a standard may be written in terms of, look, that's what a course will deliver. However, a provider might not yet say, yes, I'm going to deliver that. Equally, there's 2 or 3 standards that we'd love to use. So case in point, so a user experience engineer, completely cool job, awesomely cool job in terms of how you visualize data. There is a standard, which is in development, but it's not quite over the line yet. So a lot of these schemes, give it another 18 months, they will start to mature. People understand them better. Employers will understand them better. And inevitably, there's a virtuous cycle where the take-up improves. Has that happened to its full extent yet? No, it hasn't. However, I would sit here cautiously optimistic that the right thinking and the groundwork has been done.
I'm from Birkbeck College and part of London University. I've heard you in the past, Helen, talk about the use of vocabulary, particularly in order to address women and girls at all levels. And there's a sort of different approach, different vocabulary that actually engages women in a way that's different from the way that vocabulary may engage men to be enthusiastic. And I wonder if you would all like to comment on that, either from your experience or from the way you perhaps suggest that positions are available, for example, and you want to encourage women to actually even apply.
No, thank you for that. That's it's a can be a bit of a minefield, but I definitely, because I hesitate before answering because it's very easy to fall into gender stereotypes, which and to suggest everything you talk about things being pink and fluffy, and then you'll attract more women. And I don't think I would certainly not be advocating that. However, some of the things that have been already talked about, like emphasising communication skills, people skills, the teamwork aspects. Whether that's vocabulary or not, leave that aside, but it's the way of describing an opportunity and the type of person that is going to enjoy the work, I think makes a significant difference. And vocabulary, it might have been this example that I have used before. It's one of our other company members, Northumbrian Water. They had a role, I think it probably was user experience, basically, but just adding the word customer to the role increased massively the number of applications from women. The job was exactly the same, but it was that word, customer, appealed to women who were interested in working with people, whereas the technology side of the job might not, even though the job brief was the same. So sometimes the power of a single word, and it doesn't cost any more money, it's not about a massive marketing campaign saying we want women or making the adverts pink or anything, it's just that, subtle changes like that can make a difference. I don't know if others have got examples of that.
I think we're revolving around the point of describing outcomes rather than sort of qualifications, and I think there's a world of difference, for example, between must have Python and C+, compared with a question we could ask, which is, do you want to come and save some lives? Actually,
yes.
It's the same. It's the same side of or a different side of the same coin, but in a positioned entirely differently. Yes. And that's not just about engaging women. It's about engaging anybody who is curious and wants to make a difference. So we can sort of get rid of the sort of anorak type association with a specialist IT job by doing that.
I think, rather like Helen's just said, it's not about, it's more, if you need certain really technical skills, of course that's absolutely fundamental, but it is about a more nuanced way of bringing out the aspects of a job that enable perhaps women to think that they have an opportunity, and perhaps give them the courage or the sort of reassurance that they can actually do it in a way that perhaps a lot of adverts, and I mean, since I heard you say this earlier, I've been looking at adverts, and I think it's really interesting how few have made rather clever, I'd say, nuances to the advertising. It's gone to formulaic, sort of standard format whatever, quite streamlined in a way.
So the ones that do take a more creative approach maybe stand out?
Yes, indeed. And I think
there's an
the scope,
opportunity
and
there.
perhaps that would help both companies and also encourage more people to actually apply.
Yes.
I think, to your point earlier, sometimes the adverts are very detailed, and women do tend to go, "Oh, I can't do that. Oh my goodness, there's no way I could do that." Whereas men would be like, "Yeah, sure, I'll give it a crack. You know, it's fine." The advertisement for the Sky job was actually very high level. It was very brief, you know, for want of a better phrase. It was just more, do you enjoy doing this? You know, are you good at that kind of thing? Not must be able to do this, must be able to do that. You know, in a list a mile long, because I probably would have read it and gone, "Oh goodness, you know, I don't think I could possibly do that." But as it was, I didn't really have that to overthink because it wasn't there at the outset. So I just thought, yes, I do love doing this. Yes, I do love people. Yes, I do want to learn this. And it was just a very, you know, sort of easy to make decision rather than something I really had to analyse and, you know, go through in great detail. And so I think sometimes that can make a difference.
Yeah.
One of the points you made earlier on about interest in sort of the purpose rather than just
Yes.
the machinery, that's something we had a couple of years ago at the end of a seminar. We had kind of a round table with colleagues, and
Yes.
we all sort of explained why we went into computing, and it did seem like there was a bit of a male participants saying things like, "I like to build things," kind of, and
Yes.
the female participants maybe more. And again, it's not clear cut, but being more about, I want to make a change in the world, or I want to build something that will help people to do something better, rather than just the thing itself.
Yes.
So-
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe sometimes, like you say in the adverts, if it's then just saying you need to do
Yeah.
all the particular technical skills, it doesn't.
And one of the
If you
projects for that reason that we're working on at WISE is to have we've got a platform with called My Skills, My Life, which introduces teenage girls to role models doing a job in any area of STEM. And what we want to do this year is build content under the brand My Skills, My Life, Our Planet, to show them that if they care about the environment, which we know lots of girls do, and want to see progress on that, that if they study science, and technology would be an example as well, they could be developing better solutions than my generation has come up with. So, you know, it's another way of making technology come to life and inspiring them to say you could be working on smart meters or whatever it is, data, analysing data that comes from space or whatever, to see what the impact is on our climate, using those skills to give us better solutions in the future. So it's another way of engaging girls who don't see themselves don't see the relevance of science to things they care about or technology. Any final point from anybody in the audience before I ask the panel to sum up?
Hi, I'm Alison Adams. I work in the Data Science Campus at Office for National Statistics. Glad to see you used our statistics earlier.
Yeah.
We've got the apprenticeship scheme, we've got the graduate scheme, and I really want, my next task is to work on a return to work scheme. So I'd like to ask the panel, what are your top tips? Where do I start?
Well, I would say come to WISE and get some content from it. I can take offline. We've got a lot of experience with that. We've had examples from our members and what they've learned from that. I think one of the things just that springs to mind is an example who won an award from WISE, which was Network Rail, and they found that when they did a pilot, I think they did a pilot of 12 weeks, that it wasn't quite long enough. Right. So it was that point about giving women long enough to get to know the business and get to know different people and get the confidence back up or whatever it was they needed. And it varied by individuals, but I think they now do it as 16 weeks. So something about thinking about that length of time. But we can certainly, that's one of the sort of bits of content that's very popular with WISE, and we've had you know, events sharing case studies around that. So you don't have to start from scratch and go through all the issues, you know, learn from what other people have done, definitely. Yeah. Anything from the others to add about returner schemes?
I mean, I would probably say two things. So firstly, you know, there are sort of two elements of, I guess, barriers to entry. So one is, you know, good old-fashioned, you know, flexibility. Is it viable in the context of, you know, people's personal lives? But secondly, as an employer, articulate the need in a way which plays to the strengths of the person who might be out there, which demystifies or defuses the fear factor, and actually prevents people from showing their interest in the first place. I guess that's sort of a variation on the theme of quite a lot of the conversation that we've been having for the last hour or so. But there's huge talent out there, and how do you emotionally connect to it?
Yeah, I think one of the main concerns for me is around the whole flexibility. Civil service, really flexible, life-work balance. We do have a lot of flexible positions, but it's sort of how do we build that into our own working life?
I suppose there's two toxic words in the job description, which is must-have.
I know, yeah, and we're very good at doing that, yeah. Essential, we call it, and we're just turning that around a little bit more now of we would like you to have, but you don't have to have all of it.
Yeah, and advertising the flexibility for the jobs at the end of the returner programme will be really important, and that might mean some education of the team leaders and so on, and some support for them to think round that and how that's going to work. But when it does work, then everybody benefits. So it's definitely worth doing, I would say. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And I'll just before, so you have to be 30 seconds each. Final comment.
It's just connected to that as well. So there also, the Institute of Coding has batch courses.
Yes.
The Open University, we've got something called Open Learn. So there are lots of 24-hour courses which provide you with a really good sort of taster for at the right level. They're each 24 hours, so 8 3-hour sections, and you get a badge at the end as well. At the moment, we're actually working to automatically convert particular Open Learn badges as well to IoC badges. So once you get the Open Learn badge, you automatically then also get the IoC one.
Yeah, so that's worth looking into at the ONS to sort of partner with or look at the opportunities for learning through the OU.
That's cybersecurity, data science, networking in the technical sense, digital thinking tools. Those are all courses within that area.
Very good. Okay.
I think I'd just say, just to try and enrich your teams with diversity, and that's not have a load of 40-year-olds or have a load of females. That's a real mixture of everything, because there is a real richness that comes with it, and you're not going to get that if your recruitment processes are incredibly stringent and overly descriptive. And so just be open-minded. If you can, design in-house courses where you really get to know your potential candidates. There's surely no better way to know whether somebody's good for the job or not, other than getting to know them over like a 3-month period. I mean, it's huge. So just really think in the broader picture, and there's just a huge richness that comes with diverse teams. So just try and build those.
We're nowhere close to being a finished article, but I guess one thing when we are going out to market, we try and emphasise is that digitalisation isn't about technology; it's about empowering people to drive effective change, and we find that sort of resonates with a broader audience than if we were just advertising through technical means. So that's working well for us.
Thank you very much, and please join me in giving a round of applause to all of the panelists.